All right. Welcome back, everybody, to the deep dive. Today, we're going to do a deep dive on something that's going to impact a lot of people. I think this is a big one as
Yeah,
well. We're talking about the new policy for Employment Authorization Documents, or EADs,
Mhm.
for foreign nationals working in the U.S.
It's a big one for sure,
It is a big one.
especially for those who've been kind of, on the edge of their seats waiting for their EAD renewals. This new policy is a major sigh of relief for a lot of workers out there.
Absolutely. I can't even imagine, like, the stress of not knowing if you'll be able to keep your job or pay your bills because your work permit is just stuck in some bureaucratic black hole.
Yeah, it's been a tough few years, for
Yeah.
sure. USCIS has been dealing with this mountain of backlogged applications, and EAD renewals unfortunately got caught in the crossfire.
And so it's not even just individual workers. We're talking about businesses too, right? Like
Right.
losing skilled employees because their EADs expire.
Yeah.
That's got to be a nightmare for any company.
Absolutely. It creates all sorts of problems, staffing shortages, project delays, having to go through that whole hiring process all over again. It's not just inconvenient, it can be very costly as well.
So what's the good news? This new policy is supposed to be some magic bullet or something, right?
Well, it's definitely a step in the right direction. Back in 2022, the Department of Homeland Security, or DHS, decided to try something out. They extended the automatic renewal period for EADs to 540 days.
Right, 540 days. That's like a year and a half.
Yeah, you got it. And guess what? It worked. The temporary fix was so successful that DHS made it permanent starting January 13th of this year. So now eligible workers who file their renewals on time get a 540-day extension on their work authorization while they wait for the new EAD to come through.
Okay, that's huge. Imagine the weight lifted off people's shoulders knowing they have that much breathing room. I'm guessing, though, it's not as simple as everybody getting an automatic extension, right? There's got to be some rules.
Of course there are. First and foremost, you need to file the correct paperwork. That's Form I-765. And you have to do it before your current EAD expires.
No procrastinating on this one.
Not if you want to keep working legally in the US. And it's not for everyone either. You have to fall into a qualifying category. Like if you're applying for a green card, or you're seeking asylum, or you have temporary protected status. There's a few others. But those are some of the big ones.
So this new policy is like a safety net for those who are already in the system, allowing them to keep working while their cases are being processed. But let's be real for a sec. This doesn't solve the actual problem of USCIS being so backlogged, does it?
You're right. It's more of a temporary fix, a band-aid for a system that really needs a major overhaul. But it is still a significant win for both workers and employers. It provides some much-needed relief. In the meantime.
Okay, so for all the employers who are listening right now, what do they need to do to make sure they're following these new rules? I imagine there's some adjusting to do.
Definitely. For starters, companies need to update their internal policies, especially anything related to Form I-9, which is the form used to verify employment eligibility.
Right, Form I-9, the bane of every HR department's existence.
Exactly. But it's crucial that employers are up to speed on these new procedures for verifying work authorization, especially when they're dealing with expired EADs and those I-797C receipt notices.
So there's some homework for HR teams out there. But in the grand scheme of things, this policy seems like a positive move, wouldn't you say? I mean, a stable workforce is good for everyone.
Absolutely. Think about industries that rely heavily on foreign workers. Healthcare, technology, agriculture. Those sectors are going to see a huge benefit from this change. A more stable workforce in those industries translates to a more stable economy overall.
And let's not forget the human side of this. This policy protects vulnerable populations, like asylum seekers, allowing them to support themselves while they're navigating the complexities of the immigration system. That's got to be a huge relief for them.
It is. It provides a sense of security, knowing that they can contribute to their communities without the constant fear of losing their jobs and livelihoods.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here, but I'm sure there's more to unpack. What do you say we dive a little deeper into the impact of this policy in part 2 of our deep dive?
Sounds like a plan. So we've talked about how this new EAD extension policy provides, some much-needed relief for workers and employers alike.
For sure.
Yeah.
But I'm curious about the bigger picture here. What are the ripple effects of this policy? Not just for individuals, but for entire industries, for the economy as a whole.
That's a great question. This policy change has the potential to really reshape certain sectors, especially those that rely heavily on foreign talent.
Like healthcare, technology, agriculture.
Exactly. These are industries that have been particularly vulnerable to work authorization disruptions in recent years.
Yeah. I remember reading stories about hospitals struggling to staff nurses because of EAD delays, or tech companies having projects completely stalled because their engineers were stuck in immigration limbo. It's like a domino effect, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it's not just about the immediate impact on those companies either. It affects the entire supply chain, the innovation pipeline. Ultimately, it has an impact on all of us.
So by providing more stability for these workforces, this new policy could actually boost economic growth.
That's the idea. When businesses can operate more efficiently, when they can retain their skilled employees, they can invest more in growth and innovation, and that benefits everyone in the long run.
Okay, so we've got the economic benefits. But what about the human side of things? How does this policy impact the lives of workers and their families, beyond just being able to keep their jobs?
That's a crucial point. Imagine the stress relief for families who no longer have to worry about their primary breadwinner losing their job because of an expired EAD.
Right, it's like a weight lifted off their shoulders.
Yeah.
And for their kids, knowing that their parents can keep providing for them, that has to have a positive impact on their well-being, their sense of security.
Right. It allows these families to plan for the future, to pursue their goals, to contribute to their communities, without that constant fear of deportation looming over them.
It's about giving people a chance to build a life, not just survive. It's about recognizing their dignity and their right to pursue happiness.
Well said. It's about fairness and opportunity, and it's about aligning our immigration policies with our values as a nation.
So we've talked about a lot of the positives, but are there any potential downsides? Any challenges we need to be aware of with this new policy?
Well, one concern is that it might create a false sense of complacency. It's important to remember that this 540-day extension, it's a temporary fix, a Band-Aid solution.
Right, it's like taking pain medication for a broken leg. It might make you feel better for a while, but it doesn't actually address the underlying issue.
Exactly. USCIS still needs to work on streamlining its operations, upgrading its technology, improving its customer service.
So we're buying some time, but the root cause of the problem, those processing delays, still needs to be addressed.
Absolutely. And it's not just up to USCIS either. Employers have a role to play too.
How so? What can employers do to help move things in the right direction?
For starters, they need to educate themselves about the new rules, update their internal policies, and train their HR teams. They need to be proactive, not reactive.
They need to be advocates for their employees, pushing for a more efficient and humane immigration system overall.
Yes. And we can't forget the role of advocacy groups and legal organizations. They play a vital role in educating workers about their rights, helping them navigate this complex immigration process, and holding the government accountable.
It's a team effort, isn't it? Everyone has a role to play in creating a more just and welcoming society for immigrants.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I think it's clear that this EAD extension policy is a significant step forward.
It is. It provides much needed relief for workers and their families. It benefits businesses and the economy. And it's a step towards a more humane and equitable immigration system. But it's not the end of the story, is it?
Not by a long shot. We need to keep the pressure on for long-term solutions, for real reform that addresses those systemic issues within USCIS.
Okay, folks, we've covered a lot of ground in this second part of our deep dive, but we're not done yet. In part 3, we're going to get into the nitty-gritty details of this policy, the eligibility requirements, the specific documentation needed. We'll also hear from some real people who have been impacted by this policy change and see how it's playing out in the real world. All right, welcome back to the deep dive. You've been exploring this new 540-day automatic extension for EAD renewals, and I think it's time to really get into the weeds now, you know?
Yes, let's zoom in on those specifics, the nuts and bolts that folks need to know if they're going to navigate this new policy successfully.
Perfect. So let's start with eligibility. We've mentioned that not everyone qualifies for this extended renewal period. Can you walk us through exactly who is eligible?
Of course. First off, you can't just decide you want an extra year and a half on your work permit. You have to have a pending EAD renewal application with USCIS, meaning you've already submitted the paperwork for your renewal.
So be proactive. File that renewal before your current EAD expires. No last-minute scrambles.
Exactly. And that renewal application has to be for the same category of work authorization as your current EAD. You can't switch categories midstream and expect to get the extension.
Makes sense. Same category filed on time. What else?
Well, you have to be in one of those eligible categories we mentioned earlier, things like adjustment of status, TPS asylum seekers. USCIS has a detailed list on their website, so it's important to check if you're not sure.
Don't just assume you're good to go. Do your research, check the official sources.
Now, here's where it gets a little tricky. even if you meet all the eligibility requirements. This 540-day extension isn't automatic in the sense that it just magically appears.
Wait, what? I thought we'd been talking about an automatic extension this whole time.
We have, and it is automatic, meaning you don't have to file a separate application or make a special request. But here's the catch. You only get the extension if your current EAD expires after January 13th, 2025, when the policy went into effect.
Ah, I see. So if your EAD expired back in 2024, this new policy doesn't help you. No retroactive benefits, unfortunately.
That's right. It all hinges on that expiration date of your current EAD.
Yeah.
If it's after January 13th, 2025, and you meet all the other criteria, then you're in good shape.
Okay, eligibility is clearer now, but what about the actual process? What happens when your EAD expires and you're relying on this extension to keep working?
Well, you'll need to show your employer two key things: your expired EAD and the receipt notice. That's Form I-797C that USCIS sent you when you filed your renewal application.
So that receipt notice is like your temporary work permit, bridging the gap between the old EAD and the new one.
Exactly, and it's crucial for employers to understand this too. They need to be trained on how to properly verify work authorization using these documents.
Right, we don't want any employers getting confused and making decisions based on outdated information.
Now, this is where it can get even more nuanced, because the rules can vary slightly, depending on the specific worker category. For example, certain categories, like H-4 spouses of H-1B visa holders, might have additional requirements or documentation.
Okay, so this is definitely a situation where it's best to consult with an immigration attorney or qualified expert if you have any questions. Don't rely on rumors or internet forums. Get personalized advice.
Couldn't agree more. Immigration law is complex and ever-changing. It's always best to get guidance from someone who really knows the ins and outs.
And I'm sure there are plenty of resources out there for people who need help. USCIS has information on their website, and there are lots of reputable nonprofit organizations that provide legal aid and support to immigrants.
Absolutely, don't hesitate to reach out for help. There are people who are dedicated to helping you navigate this process successfully.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've explored the big picture, zoomed in on the details, and really tried to unpack the significance of this new policy for EAD renewals.
And while it's not a perfect solution, it's definitely a major step forward in providing that much-needed relief and stability for millions of workers and their families.
It's a step towards a system that's more efficient, more humane, and ultimately more aligned with our values as a nation. So as we wrap things up, I want to leave our listeners with a thought. Imagine a world where work authorization isn't a source of constant stress and uncertainty, a world where everyone has the opportunity to contribute their talents and skills without fear. That's the world we're working towards, and this policy change is a step in the right direction.
I completely agree. It's a positive development and hopefully a sign of more progress to come.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.